Former President Donald Trump has publicly threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 to deploy U.S. military forces in cities run by Democrats, even where local and state leaders oppose federal intervention. He argues that courts, governors, or mayors who oppose his deployment plans are obstructing efforts to control unrest or crime, and that invoking the Insurrection Act would allow him to bypass those objections. Trump has already ordered the National Guard to several cities including Chicago, Portland, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., despite legal pushback and objections from local officials. In Portland, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the deployment, citing constitutional and federal limits on presidential authority. In Illinois/Chicago, state and city officials have filed lawsuits to stop the federal takeover of the Guard in their jurisdiction. What is the Insurrection Act? And why this is controversial? The Insurrection Act of 1807 is a long-standing law that allows the U.S. president to deploy the military domestically under certain conditions. For example, to suppress insurrections, rebellion, or when states fail to enforce the law. It is an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, 1878, which generally limits the use of federal troops in civilian law enforcement. Historically, it's been used sparingly. One notable invocation was during the 1992 Los Angeles riots under President George H.W. Bush. Key legal and constitutional questions include: threshold question. Do current conditions in these cities meet the insurrection/civil disorder standard required for activating the act? State versus federal authority. Can the president override refusal by a governor or mayor to consent to deployments? Judicial oversight. Do courts have the power to block or restrain such deployments? So far, some courts are saying yes. Constitutionality. Could using it in this context violate constitutional protections, e.g. of free speech, due process, or local sovereignty? Because the law is old and rarely used, its boundaries are murky, making Trump's threat a high-stakes legal gamble. The risks and implications. Legal showdown. More states and cities are expected to sue or seek injunctions. Federal versus local conflict. This is a clash over who controls security in U.S. cities. Local officials often argue that federal military presence undermines democracy and local governance. Precedent setting. If Trump succeeds, or even partially succeeds, he may reset norms around executive authority and domestic use of force. Political escalation. This could deepen polarization. Trump frames cities led by Democrats as lawless, which his critics argue is political rhetoric to justify power grabs. Civil rights concerns. Deployment of military forces in civilian areas raises risks of excessive force, suppression of protest, and violations of rights. Chilling effect. Local governments might hesitate to counter federal directives or resist overreach in the future, even when courts or laws support them. Democratic leaders oppose Trump's military deployment in cities. Legal battles ensue over National Guard deployment in Chicago. Portland National Guard deployment raises concerns over militarization of cities. Illinois Governor Pritzker accuses Trump of using troops as political tool. Federal judge temporarily blocks Guard deployment to Portland, Chicago. The president told reporters on Monday he would consider utilizing the Insurrection Act, a law enacted more than 2 centuries ago, to sidestep any court rulings restricting his orders to send Guard troops into cities over the objections of local and state officials.